Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. I guess I should say the year still, because, yeah, we are about to change, aren't we? Inherently, there's... I don't even know what I was going to say there. Same old, I guess, still in a major emergency as far as the rest of my life goes, still having to do a lot of house cleaning, getting slower, frankly, in my opinion, sitting around watching a lot more streaming, resting, and just not playing video games and making content there, nor making leaps and bounds progress as far as house cleaning. And yeah, it's all very much small bits of hurry up and wait, which always sucks. But in this case, it's almost 100% my own doing. Just how much energy. The problem I'm mostly suffering from right now is it's just winter and it's cold, and so whenever it's winter and cold, I tend not to accomplish that much anyways. And this chart recently has been changing quite a bit as far as the 24-hour peak concurrent players. The numbers in the games being played are jumping all over the place on this lower half. But yeah, when it's too cold, I don't want to work in the garage to clean out that. When it's too warm because the heater's on because it's too cold, I just get sleepy and want to hibernate. So yeah, I am making progress, but not particularly great progress. The main project that I was working on to start with was to put my CCTV and doorbell, smart doorbell, which connects due to my own custom wiring to the CCTV, into a wall-mounted small rack mount box, which is made of metal, which immediately turned into a bit of a problem. Good thing I could take the sides off to fix the problem, in that being in a metal box, the wireless smart doorbell couldn't actually connect consistently to the internet and to the Wi-Fi. So yeah, the biggest problem there too was just remembering that my the studs in the wall there are 24 inches apart instead of 16 inches apart, so I had to put a piece of wood up, screw the wood into the studs, then screw the rack mount thing into the wood, which, yeah, you probably should have done that and planned on doing that anyways. These are things I had already known you really should have done. I just filed them away from years ago of seeing it talked about and done. But yeah, I'm also going through all of my old computer equipment stuff and wiring and AV equipment stuff, and man, I have to say, over the course of my life, it has been an incredibly crazy journey when it comes to wires and connectors, where when I was playing on NES, coaxial cable and perhaps even just individual, well, the NES itself would have been a coaxial cable or a RCA cable, and TVs, when I got the NES, the TVs that we had probably didn't even have RCA. But before we got to USB and before we got to HDMI, and it's crazy that USB hasn't replaced even HDMI at this point, plus even HDMI hasn't been fully solidified as the universal standard for connecting TVs, because there still are monitors that would want to use other connectors, DVI instead. The display port, I guess, is probably what it's called now. But yeah, analog RCA, progressive RCA. S-cart wasn't really used except for in industrial, so I don't actually have a bunch of cords for that, but as video was supposed to be the improved progress for over progressive RCA, I think. I think the quality was supposed to be slightly better on S-video. Then you also had optical toslink for audio. And let's see. I imagine there's a couple I'm even forgetting about. But it was just a whole mess of wires. And even now when you're wiring up a surround system, you're still probably wiring just standard bare wires to each speaker. So if you have a 7.1 setup, you're probably still running one analog connector to the subwoofer and one RCA analog connector, and you're running pairs of wires to every single speaker. So out the back of that, you just can expect there to be a mess of wires. There's no cheap and easy way of fixing that either. Although I have seen some speakers that straight up have Bluetooth built in. Bluetooth audio still is not really good enough compared to directly wiring to a speaker. But yeah, it's just been a mess. And that's not even talking about the USB side of things in the pre-USB when things were connected via serial connectors, joystick ports. And while I have previously in my life gotten rid of a lot of the archaic just connectors that you're never going to use, I still have a lot. And that's not even including a whole bunch of barrel plugs that I have. And these have all just been sitting in my garage gathering dust for the past decade. And so yeah, I really am at the point where I think I should probably get rid of them, which there's just no going back. We are miles ahead as far as connectivity standards, and this barely has anything to do with video games, as most of these warm-up discussions tend to be. But yeah, we are miles ahead with USB-C in particular, and USB in general just being a connecting standard. I still have a ton of USB-A to USB-B connectors that I need to get rid of. There's just no point. I would never want to use a device that had a USB-B connector on it, and if I did, I'd gladly just buy a new plug if that was so needed, if it didn't come with one. But even things like printers and scanners these days, I imagine, have USB either A connectors to them or USB-C connectors on the back of them, which, yeah, that is clearly the right move. It's just to have a USB-C connector on the back of any kind of printer, because that connector is the same on both sides, and there is no directionality necessary in USB-C. There wasn't, I think, any directionality even with USB-A and USB-B. I think it was just a ridiculous introduction of a new standard for very little reason. But yeah, it's time to get rid of those things. Internal audio connectors to like CD-ROMs that you'd put in the computer is probably not necessary either, but I'd keep them just in case. But yeah, I have a whole bunch of like CD sleeves. I would never really burn CDs or Blu-rays or anything like that. Even though I do have a Blu-ray burner, there's just not enough data there, unless I was just actively trying to burn one movie or one small backup. But 25 gigabyte bits is laughably small. Keeping the sleeves makes more sense than keeping blank discs even. Yeah, and this is the habit of pretty much everybody with a junk drawer, is that they would have a ton of things that they're still holding on to from years and years ago, but we are so far away from the Radio Shack mentality that you would ever need to reach into that junk drawer and get a component and try and repair or fix anything. Everything is just so incredibly disposable now. Even the barrel jack plugs I have, unlikely to be useful unless I was going to try and do some kind of crazy project. So yeah, I think it is only sentimentality that's going to hold me back from throwing away the vast majority of those items. Then my tools are all over the place, and I need to rethink about where I'm going to keep my tools in the future and how I'm going to treat them. Generally, I think I still am going to put them in the garage and let them rest in the garage, but an organization certainly could be helpful. And the major thing I'm still dealing with is I really have like 4 or 5 sets of different types of kitchenware and dishes and things like that, and I really need to get it down to 2, and in some rare occasions maybe 3 of the same thing. I just ordered like a new blender. I already have a blender, so it definitely makes a lot of sense to put one blender in a Tupperware and maybe keep it in the garage as a backup. Maybe not throw it away or sell it, because it probably wouldn't sell for much. If it did sell for something, that would be nice, but it just probably wouldn't. But yeah, having just a prepackaged, if I had to skip town right now, pack of cookware in the garage and taking up just a couple of Tupperwares at most, it's not terrible as a thought. But then I have a lot of dishwares. I have like coiningware that's white. I have clear glassware, which I kind of want to get rid of the clear glassware. Both coiningware and glassware both have that same problem of being breakable, but in reality, neither one of them, if they are designed to be put in the oven, are going to break in a disastrous way compared to breaking like a glass that you drink out of, a drinking glass or a plate or something. So yeah, and there isn't really other options there. You could go with metal bakeware if you wanted to, but that'll get rusty and dinged up as even faster than breaking a coiningware dish. Well, but it is kind of sucky to potentially have one set of fancy white coiningware and then one set of clear glassware, which the glassware is not particularly fancy since it's just clear, and then occasionally have yet another thing that's a different color. And that's what I'm trying to do, is be fairly OCD about just matching things. I have a whole bunch of Tupperware that's probably from 2 or 3 different sets. Some of it Rubbermaid, some of it Ziploc, and ideally I'd want it all to have the same color and be the same brand, but in reality, whatever I have the most of that makes sense, I'll keep. And I'm just trying to get rid of the orphans where there's like one piece of Rubbermaid that somehow exists in my collection, my far too large collection of rubber dishware, that doesn't match anything else. And definitely there's some that look like they match, but then the lids don't quite fit. A lot of that, I imagine, because it's the store and go stuff that's just been melted ever so slightly in the dishwasher, because that top rack only plastic, it's like Rubbermaid store and go, is not designed to really last. But yeah, I just have a ton of dishware that I'm still sorting through and cleaning, which all of that is a very long way of saying I'm not playing video games, although I am very close, I will say, Let's look at my chart, since we've been scrolling up and down the Steam DB chart for a while now. I am very close to finishing the Cardcaptor Sakura game, which, if it's still in beta, they've really not proven any need for it to be in beta. And if it's out of beta, it feels like I've almost done everything in the game. Which is the thing that would make me lean towards thinking it is still in beta, but also I just kind of feel like they've probably abandoned it for the most part. They really have not updated at all since launch with any new content other than a few events that are pointless. And I'm almost completely done with the story, and the story is based off the anime, so they can't add any more story at that point. So unless I get to the end of the story and it just unlocks something completely different, I will be completely done with it as soon as I just get around to finishing this story, which I'm not playing the Cardcaptor Sakura game. It's an awful game. It's just stupidly made, money grubby, definitely not highlighting the anime or the manga in any way. There are entire characters that are not rendered in the story modes, and when you do see Sakura, even the main protagonist, you just always see her, for the most part, in her school uniform, regardless of the scenario and situation and what she actually would have been wearing in that conversation, going through a very limited loop of animations, making it look like she's talking and moving naturally, but not really. There are concepts of a game that might have been more interesting there, but it is drowned in a deluge of other stupid content. I'm still playing Memento Mori, which as an AFK game makes it very easy to still love the game without really having to play it too much, although it does have a ton of daily quests too. I appreciate the daily quests because I actually do want the resources to unlock the new characters, which then also unlocks the potential for new songs, which is the main selling point of Memento Mori, is the character collection gacha. And the characters in Memento Mori actually look good compared to the little Funko Pop figurines you collect in Cardcaptor Sakura's game. And then I'm playing a lot of Pokemon Pocket, really putting a lot of time into it for very little reason. I'm still not sure how many games per day you can play to get rewards. I need to really just count it and figure it out, but it does seem like there's a fairly small maximum number of shop credits you can get from playing a game, and everything else is just on a wait timer. So I'd play even more of Pokemon Pocket if the game would just let me. But yeah, honestly, even if you spent money on it, you could buy your way out of that problem, but it would be extremely expensive. Yeah, and I just don't know if there's a good argument there as far as playing a lot more, particularly if you're going to pay, because you're just not going to get rewarded much more. Even if I was a whale in the Pokemon Pocket game, I severely question how much more I could get from the game, how much more I could unlock. You could get more cards, certainly, but at a certain point, you are going to have 2 copies of every card available. I'm almost to that point, and you're going to be opening packs just for the rarest of the rare cards to try and get multiple copies of those. Once you have over 2, you're just trading them out for the Marvel Snap style flare and animation that you can put on cards, which is an absolutely worthless system to me. I don't care one bit about it. So yeah, even as a free-to-play player, I am very close to having at least 1 copy of every card in the current promo. So if they don't fairly quickly add a new expansion, I'm going to end up just having a whole bunch of extra resources sitting in my account ready to spend on that next expansion, which would be a great situation to be in, I imagine, in that potentially you're on day one of a new expansion, you could just open hundreds of packs. So yeah, I don't think my chart here has changed too much, but we are getting very close to the point of thinking about, should I start blacklisting things on January 1st? As far as, let's really think about what games this year were worth talking about and actually had an update that even was newsworthy. Because, yeah, when you go over the top 10 most played games, either by bots or humans, over the amount of time I've been sampling, which has been roughly half a year, maybe 5 months instead of 6, Counter-Strike 2 has been consistently in the top spot for pretty much every week. There was a couple weeks where it was in the second spot. And PUBG and Dota and Banana. And while Banana is noteworthy of talking about for this year recap, it's almost certainly 100% or approaching 100% bots that are playing it. So is it really relevant? Is this what gamers are really talking about as Banana? I don't think so. The autumn sale ends today, so we are hitting that point where if you were holding back for some reason, I saw very few Cyber Monday sales, of even mentioned by Slick Deals. I suppose if you were holding back for some reason, the Steam Deck might still be on sale, and that still makes a lot of sense to buy, but that's kind of it. Yeah, that would be, by this point, either you've paid no attention whatsoever to the Steam sale and just didn't know it existed, or you've got your list down and you're ready and you've already purchased things. Yeah. It is also worth pointing out that while I was making YouTube shorts, and I actually did get some made, my computer also decided to just randomly reboot, which I'm really tired of this computer, and so I'm glad I have a whole new computer to put together. I am trepidatious though that I'm going to build a whole new computer and it's still going to have some weirdness to it for one reason or another. And yeah, my only hope is that a fresh install of Bazarite Linux just creates a whole different situation that hopefully is just way better. Certainly will be the achievement of a goal that I want to check this game out. Let's see, how do we open the links? Let's just open this link too, just in case that just opened a screenshot. It'll be an achievement of a goal that has long since been my desire and many people's desires to get away from Windows if Bazarite Linux actually can work as far as a gaming operating system, and that once and for all we could be done with being tied to Windows. And yeah, who knows, with virtualization and everything, it probably wouldn't be too crazy that if there was just some small thing that needed to run on Windows, that you could have a virtual machine inside Bazite Linux. I haven't even investigated that thought. It runs Windows or Windows 11 or something like that. But yeah, my first goal in building my new computer is going to be just have a PC that doesn't randomly reboot, that doesn't have this weird micro stuttering issue. And what confuses this even more is that as I've been trying to pay more attention to computers and PC podcasts and things lately, perhaps to my own detriment, and arguably I've also been trying to not pay attention to slick deal sales and all of that. Like it would be fairly wise to just think about stop looking at slick deals altogether. I have it in my RSS feed and I've moved it down to the very bottom, but I'm still checking it. I still have that knee-jerk reaction to check it. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. No, as I've been watching more PC stuff lately, I have been hearing more people talk about how Windows just seems to be less stable for everybody. So it may very well be the case that Windows 10 in particular is getting updates that are buggier, and there is perhaps just some element of when you had a Windows XP install in previous generations, it just wasn't as complicated and it wasn't connected online to Windows Update and things like that as much. So things, once they got locked in, would just stay the same. Now inherently, for antivirus reasons and security reasons, that's a bad thing that you wouldn't get patches. But if the patches also come with bugs, that's a real issue. What's super annoying though is when my computer randomly rebooted, it didn't say there really was a reason for it, and so the only thing I can really assume is that my making of the YouTube shorts was pushing the video card too hard, but even that, it shouldn't reboot. Like that, there should be something more to it. There should be something in the logs, and there just isn't. It's just like a full-on power reboot thing, which that just doesn't make any sense at all. That feels like somehow I'm pushing a video card to take more power than than the power supply can provide, and I don't believe that's the case, but maybe it is. It definitely was in the era of Windows 95, and I'll stop rambling pretty soon here. This looks like this is yet another adult game. Right on the front page this time. We're down in the bottom here where they're recommending some newer content that I haven't seen before, but don't recognize at least. It definitely was the case in the past, though, in the eras of Windows 95, that your computer would just reboot randomly, and that was just the way of life and the way business happened. And perhaps it would be better for a society if computers did just randomly go down and reboot, because then that might just slow down the constant demand of people being more efficient, and just give people back more of that slower lifestyle that people really need to have. But yeah, it's not video game related, but I think it is also pointing out that it seems like the United States is going to try and change the rules in which people with disabilities were allowed to be paid less than minimum wage. That never made any sense at all. in a lot of cases, to me personally, this is my opinion, it never made any sense that anybody should be allowed to be paid less, whether it's a tip staff waiter or whether it's someone with disability. Companies like Goodwill, I think in particular, have entire business models built around hiring physically or mentally disabled people and paying them about $2 an hour, with no tips making up the difference at all. And it's just exploitation. Now, inherently, you will have disabled people that say, well, I can't get a job at all because nobody will hire me at minimum wage. And inherently, I would say, well, if that's the case, you probably should be on disability and not have a job. And a lot of that is like grocery stores hiring mentally disabled people who actually aren't doing the job particularly great. Although I will say, I have seen that at grocery stores, one of the grocery stores I've frequented several years ago, the mentally disabled person was doing a way better job than any of the other people that were not disabled in that way, and just had a better attitude overall. But yeah, it's still just exploitation. It's not like food costs less for disabled people. It really doesn't, not in the United States. It's not like clothing or housing costs less. There are some assistance programs, but they're not particularly helpful or good or fully funded. A lot of the assistance programs in the United States give money to churches and organizations that then can squander it in completely different ways with less oversight. And so it just makes a complicated system. I guess the sale is all over. Not seeing the Steam Deck on sale anymore. Unless this was the new default price. No, it was down to $350. So the sale is over for the Steam Deck. So yeah, inherently, it's just moral and makes a lot of sense to have to pay at least the minimum wage, which is not a livable wage by any means. A livable wage would be about $11 an hour, not $7.25 an hour in the United States. Depending on where you live, the living wage may be a lot higher than that. But yeah, paying disabled people the same amount and treating them fairly is a smart move. If that leads to a bunch of disabled people not being employed anymore, which I don't think it really would, then so be it. They probably shouldn't have been employed in the first place. That creates the next problem of disabled people receiving better and more services from disability. All of these issues certainly get fixed, theoretically at least, with universal basic income fixing a lot of things. That being said, nobody is talking about universal basic income. That was not even a conversation topic in the most recent presidential election season in the United States. Which, yeah, it definitely should still be considered a thought. But no, there's certainly no taste for that. So, yeah. Anyways, the US government's going to try to seek to change those rules that they made themselves. We'll see how many corporations and cronies and oligarchs influence it, so that doesn't really happen. I imagine the likes of big business like Walmart and Amazon.com hire a lot of disabled people and pay them less for doing the exact same job as every other employee. And yeah, inherently there are definitely disabled people who are doing the exact same job or more work as other people, but getting paid less just because they're disabled, which if it were any other protected class, that totally would be illegal. You couldn't pay women less. You couldn't pay minorities less just because they're they're minorities or women. Same should be true for people with disabilities. Now, inherently, if they can't do the job, they can't do the job. That's a different thing. But if they can do the job with reasonable accommodation even, which everybody should be offered reasonable accommodations in general, there is a point that needs to also be made that to be technically qualified as disabled in the United States is a lot of paperwork and a lot of hoops to jump through, where there's a lot of people in the middle too. It's not just you're perfectly able and healthy. There's basically nobody like that. And then on the other side of the scale, there's disabled people. There's plenty of people out there that need to take 5 to 10 bathroom breaks a day, but otherwise are great workers, or need to take even 3 bathroom breaks instead of 2 a day, and they're great workers. There's plenty of people out there that have a limp, or, you know, are maybe a little bit mentally slow, but not to a disabled level. May just be bad at math. Like, most of people, I would imagine, are in the middle between what would actually qualify as disabled and this hypothetical perfect being that is perfectly able. And so any of those people deserve reasonable accommodation. Reasonable is a bad term to use, certainly, but they deserve to be treated as individuals and be accommodated for their specific needs as best as people can. Yeah. Inherently, all of this is just based on capitalism and the economics of capitalism, and how it does not really care for the worker, or consider the worker in its equations much at all. Sees the worker as just a robot and nothing more. Anyways, that's more than enough rambling, so let's actually get into video game news now. A new PS5 system update improves data transfer between consoles. At what point do you transfer data between consoles, though? Like, what data is being transferred? Are there pre-rendered shaders that are being downloaded on the PS5? I don't believe so. I imagine pre-rendered shaders would be baked into the discs themselves. Captures is what they're using as an example. So I guess if you capture a video, you could transfer it to another PlayStation 5 using some faster method, I imagine. The method can't be that much faster though. Yeah, because at a certain point, either wirelessly or wired, you're going to be connecting both PS5s to the same network, and then you're going to move things over. And yeah, particularly if it's in your own network, that's going to just hit the maximum of what your network can handle and what all the network equipment involved can handle. As far as speeds go, there's no opportunity really for torrenting to speed up that process when you're just transferring items from one to the other. There is an opportunity for parallel data transfer, but in the case of inside your own network, it's probably not much faster, if any faster, to do it that way either. I would have to assume that the only thing you could really do is just have a much bigger amount of RAM set aside to receive data. Maybe RAM buffering even to send data between the two, because the slow part would be the hard drive built in, but even in that, the hard drive may not be slower than the network connections. So yeah, it seems to me, if I was to just not knowing anything else, it seems like this update was struggling to find something to claim had been improved just to have an update. And if that's really the case, did they really need to put out an update in the first place? Let's see. Apparently, Mario and Luigi's Brothership developer wanted an edgier Mario, but Nintendo said no. We've unleashed Acquire into the wild, only to go chasing after them again. Yeah, I don't think Mario as a character being fairly personalityless. What do you really know about Mario other than he's, I guess, childishly in love with Princess Peach, which even in Mario Odyssey that gets rebuffed. So Mario is in this weird situation now where they made Princess Peach have more personality and be more of a feminist, when now that smacks in the face of the love triangle that is Bowser, Mario, and Princess Peach. So yeah, I don't know what else you can really do with him. I feel like in Paper Mario and all the other previous games, Mario as a character barely said anything, and you would hear Toad talking to Mario in most of those games. Yeah. But yeah, I definitely can't see how making the kid-friendly icon for designed for the youngest of kids edgier would make more sense. Even visually, if that's all they were really trying to change there, I just don't think that makes a lot of sense. Like, the iconic Mario look here should stay the same. I don't see the concept of getting rid of his hat and putting on a coat, changing and even changing the boots. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. You could probably do that as a power-up, but you want your basic Mario to be there most of the time. Even the animation style here may just not feel Mario enough, although I wouldn't say that this animation style looks terrible. Is this really news, though? I guess is the question. And or is this really just pointless? Yes, I imagine a lot of things were proposed in early development, and I imagine the vast majority of it was knocked down by Nintendo, as it would have been knocked down by any Japanese company that really is not looking for anything unique in their products. And Nintendo has succeeded greatly by giving you just about the same stuff and only really embracing new ideas if it comes directly from Nintendo and Shigeru Miyamoto himself. There is definitely a division here between Acquire being a second party company developer and Shigeru Miyamoto being a first party developer, and Shigeru Miyamoto being the creative lead and nobody else being allowed to add anything creatively. In fairness, though, I'd say Acquire should take any concepts that they had that got rejected or that they were thinking about and never even really pitched it to Nintendo and just put it aside for their next project and said, you know what, we know Nintendo's not going to let us mess with Mario. They might have let you mess with, say, Samus Aran from the Metroid series because they don't care about her. But even that, it is worth pointing out that the last time somebody did make major changes to Samus Aran, everybody hated it. So Nintendo wasn't wrong to reject any concepts there. And edginess, I'm not even sure kids these days really are that much of edgelords, so edginess may not resonate with kids these days as much as it might have resonated back when I was a kid, where I definitely was an edgelord, and I think a lot of people were. A free trial version of Gran Turismo 7 launches this week, in direct contrast to all the NASCAR games being taken down. Next, PlayStation boss says games should be shorter because development costs are not sustainable. Which is interesting. The screenshot here that they're using for this, because I imagine this is Sean Layden saying this, which Sean Layden seems to be constantly doing interviews and constantly bringing up that failed game. But yeah, he generally is not wrong. The headline's not wrong. Like, games should use less budget, reduce cost. Does that inherently mean games should be shorter? Shorter is probably the wrong word. There definitely are a lot of games, in particular when you get into games as services, that should be shorter and shouldn't be games as services in the first place. But I would think generally we're still going to see a target of 60 hours for a AAA game to be the minimum. If it went down to 50 hours, I don't think too many people would care, particularly if it just kind of slowly became the case that it was like that. But if overnight all AAA games selling for $70 or more were 35 hours, people would definitely care. At that point, that would be way too little content. Inherently, though, I would say it's not that games should be shorter. It's just games should be less top tier polished. Like they should spend less money in development doing 3D face scanning and motion capture and overpaying voice actors. Cut those budgets in half to reduce costs first. Have the graphics look good enough but not amazing. Don't spend an extra 6 months programming your game to look as visually amazing as possible. Pay more to the writers so there's actually more of a story to talk about in the long run, and your game will last longer. Pay more to the programmers so there's actual gameplay mechanics that people actually care about. But yeah, there's definitely a Hollywood mentality that is prevalent in game making too, in which it's just how much money can we spend on the CGI, how much money can we pay the actors and the visuals, and how expensive can we do the IMAX version of things, and how much music can we license out. Let's see, Stalker 2 is getting a new patch fixing crashes and memory leaks. Or it has gotten a new patch to fix crashes and memory leaks and other issues, which version 1.0.3 is available now for PC and is coming soon to Xbox. So it does seem like Stalker 2, although seemingly succeeding well enough, has launched a little bit buggy, which, I mean, there's still not a ton of competition right now, so they're probably getting away with more bugginess than they should, and bugginess unfortunately has become very standard, and we'd like to see that improved too. Let's see. Nintendo is apparently postponing the Alarmo sales in Japan. Stock shortages. It means it's only available for Nintendo Switch Online. They have hacked this already so that you can put Doom on it, and that's pretty much it. In the first week or two, there's nothing really special about the hardware that would make it difficult to hack, other than it does have some encryption in the firmware that they figured out how to mostly get around that. The physical hardware of the 2mm wave sensors could be something of interest if you've got a hacking project for it to work, but I think only in a fair few cases, really, because inherently, without adding hardware to it, I don't think this has an Alexa style microphone in it, which is what you kind of would want. and as such, it's just going to be an alarm clock. I don't think it, at its high price, unless it was severely discounted at some point, I don't think you would ever want to use it as just a motion sensor or presence sensor in any other room. And I just don't think that there's too much else you can do with it. Perhaps there's some kind of exercise program where it could have you jump up and down, or stretch to the left, stretch to the right, and do kind of yoga stretches and things like that that it could do. But that's about it. It's just not that useful as an input device otherwise. Honestly, if they had gotten the price down to about $40, it would be a reasonable Christmas gift to get for kids, as just here's a almost stocking stuffer type thing. But at nearly $100, I think is what it sells for, it's just not worth it. You know, $9.99. And I don't think you're going to be able to hack it to be streaming Spotify or playing music. I bet the speaker's not good enough for anything like that, so it could be even an alarm clock with a radio, which should clearly be built into it. If it could do that, then it might have some extra value, but you are still making an argument in 2025, effectively, of having an alarm clock radio instead of just having your phone do the same things, which your phone can do anything that the alarm radio could do. Yeah. And kids these days, if you're going to spend $100 on an alarm radio for a kid, you might as well spend a couple $100 more and get them a cell phone. You can give kids hand-me-down cell phones that don't even have SIM cards in them and connect them to the Wi-Fi in your house only, and you still would have a better experience than what an alarm radio can do. Moving on, Donkey Kong Land 3 is now on Switch Online, completing the Game Boy trilogy of all three games. Donkey Kong Land 1 and 2, I imagine. Which the Game Boy versions of those games are probably great examples of what Game Boy really was, in that there was no competition, so the Game Boy games could be much shorter, more simplistic, and just in no way even comparable to the Donkey Kong Country versions of their games, or the Donkey Kong Country games. It was simply a matter of portability, that people wanted to play games on the go, and there was no other option back then. Nowadays, we are in a very different situation, and yet we still kind of have almost the same outcome. Cell phone games are still a completely different thing from console games or PC games. The quality is nowhere as good on cell phone games compared to PC or console games, and the experience is nowhere the same. I would like to see that go away. I'd like to see cell phone games be very, very similar to PC and console games, but it just doesn't happen. It is way better, though, I would say, than playing something like Donkey Kong Country and then Donkey Kong Land, which, yeah, that was part of the craziness of even the Virtual Boy, is just how Virtual Boy games in no way were as long or as good, and they definitely did not have a visual fidelity compared to what would have been Nintendo 64 games, I think, at the time. I think, yeah, Nintendo 64 came out, then the Virtual Boy came out. And yeah, if it were more of a case that the Virtual Boy could have had more voluminescence to its images, it would have been a lot better of an experience too, because a lot of the images in Virtual Boy games are kind of outlines of characters instead of being completely full of characters. I don't think there was a chip powerful enough to do fully textured 3D rendered voxels in the Virtual Boy. I know for a fact that the hardware was not there, that blue lasers did not exist. Green lasers probably did exist, but would have been too expensive. So thus the Virtual Boy only had a red laser to make its graphics. And in that, they probably could have done something to the red laser to make it white, where it would have been more recognizable. At that point, there probably could have been a phosphorescent screen of some sort that would have been where you would excite particles with a red laser to make it glow white, but that probably wouldn't have had a high enough refresh rate for them to work. And I don't think you can just put a filter on a red laser to make it white. But yeah, it definitely was a product that even today has never come back into real style. Although the technology is not too dissimilar from some of the monitors built into glasses that are coming out every now and then. The technology there just not quite good enough still. But NDLP rear projections basically are the technology that the Virtual Boy had. Anyways, I'm on a tangent of nostalgia today, it feels like, so let's move on. Following months of speculation, Ubisoft is closing its shooter X Defiant. Hundreds will lose jobs as part of Ubisoft's decision. Yeah, I don't think I've heard a lot of people talking about X Defiant, so I don't even know where the speculation is coming from. But yeah, Ubisoft still really not running itself the way I think people would want it to be run, even from the perspective of gamers. I think there might be a disagreement between gamers and shareholders as to how they want Ubisoft to be run, but I think there is agreement that nobody likes how it's run right now. Indiana Jones has gotten its, or Indiana Jones and the Great Circle has gotten its PC specs, a launch trailer, and global release times. Let's see if we can get a general idea of what the PC specs are. You have two subcategories here in whether or not you want full ray tracing, which full ray tracing may make the graphics better, but probably won't affect the game in any other way. And then you have regular, with a minimum being a, let me read this, 3.8 gigahertz processor, i7 10700K, or Ryzen 5 3600, 3.6 gigahertz processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and then they want you to have a minimum of 2060 with 8 gigabytes of graphical video RAM, which then big numbers here we can say it seems like it's not particularly GPU heavy, because the question here is when you go up to recommended, so that's where we are, and it's all just saying Windows 10, it just wants you to have more cores of the same CPU. And interestingly, this one actually is saying get an i7 that has, I believe, even more cores, or is just more higher generation, but it can be at a lower speed, 3.0 versus 3.6. Although the Ryzen one here, as far as the ultra performance, is at a 4.7 gigahertz. So it's not until you start putting up higher amounts of graphics that the CPU seems to need to require more. They don't need any more than 32 gigabytes of RAM, they're saying. And then the graphics card is a 3080 Ti versus a 4080 Ti, so yeah. Now notice none of this is showing resolutions they're talking about here. So in general, this ultra setting recommendation is just, I guess, going to be for the ultra resolutions, which I guess it says down here that the resolution here would be 4K native with 60 frames per second, where they're recommended as 1440p native with 60 frames per second. And the minimum is 1080p at 60 frames per second. And so I suspect a lot of this is more hopefulness than anything, but in reality, if a lot of people are still like me just playing at 1080p, you should be able to do 1080p very nicely with a better system, less stuttering and staggering or issues, if any issues do show up, than staying at 1080p. So you should have no problems at all. And that's really where I think I'm going, and I think a lot of people are going, is that they're just going to say, I don't care about 1440p or 4K. Keep me at 1080p and just let me play the newest games at a good experience. That being said, you would need at least 32 gigabytes of RAM, which I would recommend that, yes, in building a new computer. Although 64 gigabytes is more of a safe bet. And you are going to need something that has a lot of cores, a 4-core or 8-core. If you really want to go fancy, at 3.6, 3.8, it's probably good enough, but if you can get to 4.7, by all means get to 4.7. Although, again, CPU may not really play a big role. Now, everything seems to be the same for RAM when you want to do full ray tracing, but the graphics for ray tracing requires a 4070 NVIDIA. Can't even do it with Ryzen, but they recommend a 4080 with 16 gigabytes, and the Ultra is a 4090 with 24 gigabytes. And so this is another example where if you want ray tracing, you're having to go with only one company, and you can't have that all AMD setup, which also means that the console versions are going to have to implement ray tracing, if they do implement ray tracing, a completely different way, because no consoles use NVIDIA. 120 gigabytes across the board as far as storage goes, and with ray tracing it is 1080p upscaled versus it being 1080p native, so you're losing actual ray tracing resolution by going with ray tracing. So it's quite the compromise, I would say. And it doesn't seem like the CPU requirements are changing really at all. Well, it might be the case that the minimal here is 1070, the minimal here is 1070. Yeah. So CPU is not changing at all if you want full ray tracing. It's just the GPU's requirements. And I don't think people generally want this kind of situation where you're having to upscale your resolution just to get ray tracing. Some people may think ray tracing looks way better, but I would suspect maybe not. So let's look at the launch trailer and see if we can see some of that ray tracing. So far, I would say what I've seen looks like you could do it without ray tracing. Specific scenarios where you might be seeing reflections on the water while interacting wouldn't really need ray tracing, and any pre-rendered cutscene like this part doesn't inherently need ray tracing to be enabled. You could pre-render that, assuming this is pre-rendered concepts. Now I'm noticing in this trailer there's quite a lot of people, which tends not to be the case in Indiana Jones movies. I know you have to turn it into a video game, but it does seem like there's just kind of a lot of characters here, which probably highlights how there's a lot more talking in this game than people really are being led to believe. A camera mode, potentially implying that you're going to do photography puzzles. There they do a quick jump to show him actually interacting with things, which I imagine you're going to do a lot of that too. And I do believe I just saw some QTEs happening there too. Now we know there are stealth sections in this game, but I can't help but wonder if there are long sections of the game in which you're not fighting anything and not doing any kind of stealth stuff. And unlike Lara Croft, there's only so much swimming and platforming that you really would expect. Although inherently, if a new Indiana Jones game just ripped off the Tomb Raider series, which ripped off Indiana Jones in the first place, it's really just an acceptable snake eating its own tail situation. And it does kind of feel like there's just a split here between some of the conversation sections and some of the puzzling sections and some of the running and gunning sections. One of the trailers I watched in a previous stream from a couple days ago got Content ID claimed. No copyright strike or anything, so it's not really a problem. It didn't even really get claimed, it just got identified. So it didn't affect any monetization or anything there. But it was a trailer for a game that barely showed anything in the first place, and it's just kind of crazy. Yeah, but that does occasionally happen, particularly from Japanese companies. And this was a Japanese game. Moving on, I need to hurry up, otherwise today's going to be a very slow day, which it probably was going to be anyways. Black Ops 6 and Warzone Season 1 Reloaded have an update detailed. Check that out at videogameschronicle.com if you actually care about it. I don't. December's PlayStation Plus Essential games are now live. Let's see. Aliens Dark Descent and Tim. Now I remember the name Tim. I would assume this is Tim, but I don't recall what it is. Legend Switch 2 accessories are already being sold online. Vendors on Alibaba claim to be selling Switch 2 cases and screen protectors, which is somewhat believable. Like, it wouldn't take much for an empty plastic shell to get into the hands of somebody who makes shells and screen protectors, or to even know I mean, you don't even need an empty plastic shell. You really just need the dimensions of where buttons would go and what the screen thing would be. And particularly if you're buying it on Alibaba and it doesn't actually fit when a Switch 2 comes out, then you're going to have very little recourse anyways. I suppose that is video game related news, where I don't know if it has been fully confirmed and announced that it's going to happen, but it has been at the very least threatened. I wasn't paying enough attention when I saw this article that China, in retaliation for any kind of tariffs, would impose a rare element ban to the United States, which, yeah, China, I believe, has 90% of all the processing capacity in the world as far as rare elements, and about a third of the world's supply of rare elements, which make up things like nickel, like batteries and electronics and things. And while there has been a push to remove rare earth elements and rare elements in general from the development of electronics, it certainly hasn't succeeded in enough that you're not using these rare elements here and there. So yeah, that could be devastating, and in fairness, maybe that's not 100% just retaliation from China from tariffs, but yeah, that certainly could be a beginning of a major trade war, which trade wars eventually tend to lead to hot wars. So yeah, things are heating up with just the talk of tariffs before even the president-elect has gotten into power to even impose any kind of tariffs. And that is certainly a perfect example of why you do not discuss tariffs. And if you are going to discuss tariffs, you have to do it very gently and slowly and procedurally to get countries to potentially warm to the idea of tariffs. It is also more of a global bit of news, but worth mentioning that very quickly over the course of yesterday, the South Korean president seemingly attempted to have a coup and failed, seemingly not having any real support there, and will, I think, be either impeached or stepped down very quickly. Now, my understanding of South Korean politics is that there's a long history of the presidents being corrupted and kicked out in disgrace, and that politics in South Korea is very corrupt, and there's a lot of capitalism and oligarchs, Samsung in particular, just basically running the country. But yeah, instability in South Korea would affect gamers directly, certainly, in that there are a lot of South Korean game companies like Shift Up, makers of Stellar Blade, that if there was just major instability in South Korea, would those games and those developments would probably slow down or stop, and any kind of geopolitical instability in South Korea may embolden North Korea and the Korean War to start up again, which then the United States very possibly would get involved in. They still are very much involved in that. And I don't believe the Korean War was ever officially ended as far as even North Korea and the United States. I'm almost certain it hasn't officially ended between North Korea and South Korea. So yeah, times are turbulent, certainly, right now, the past couple days. Moving on, back to more direct Nintendo and video game news. PlayStation says that AI can revolutionize games, but it won't replace the human touch. I've heard similar sentiments said many times. This is certainly just a new buzzword in which it may very well be the case that CEOs are getting asked about AI, and so they've developed this response to play both sides of the argument, or it may very well be that this is just what PR companies are telling them to say. But yeah, I can't imagine right now expecting AI to do anything good as far as the artistic endeavors of creating video games, which the artistic aspects of creating video games are just ever getting degraded down to the point where if video game companies don't realize and see the failing of the movie industry, they are going to go headfirst into the exact same situation where the movie industry has become very much obsessed about making profits and has failed to engage and continue the artistry of movies. And yeah, you would want to find a happy middle ground between like book publishing companies, where the situation is almost the exact opposite, where the artistry of a book being published probably has a lot more value than anything else because they can't put more money into the book publishing aspect of it to try and get people to buy the books. So books have plateaued in how much you can pay an author and how much book can really cost. Even at that, I've seen some books that are like hardbacks that are like $200, but yeah, in reality a paperback book should be about $10 to $20. Even if it's a fairly large novel, it should really only be $40 or $50. And thus, book publishing companies have to find more artists who can write more books instead of putting all of their money into the next Stephen King book and only publishing one Stephen King book a year. So yeah, I'd like video games to be somewhere in the middle there, where there's more opportunities for creative people to create games and less gimmickeries such as AI try to make games be bigger and more profitable as tentpoles, which the whole tentpole concept at this point is out the window, because you're not really making a tentpole game when you're putting almost all of your resources into the sequel of that tentpole. You're not holding up the tent for anything else. It's an empty tent at that point. That's not the point of a tentpole game. Moving on, Monster Hunter Wilds beta frequently moving monsters where a bug. So apparently there was a bug where monsters would just move. Interesting. 20 minutes of Monster Hunter Wilds gameplay if you want to watch that on Video Games Chronicle. From Software is not really considering an Elden Ring 2 development, which I wouldn't be surprised if the problem there is that you can't get George R.R. Martin back to write the story for an Elden Ring 2, and generally it's probably not worth spending the money to hire George R.R. Martin to make an Elden Ring 2 when From Software could just make a spiritual successor from Elden Ring and make it cheaper and set it in a slightly different world. All of these games, on the outside looking in, are just fantasy world, Demon Souls, Dark Souls style games, so it seems like you could easily make another series with that same concept fairly easily and just not call it Elden Ring 2. Let's see, Xbox has added a free Indiana Jones dynamic background on the Series X and S, which inherently, this is the first time we've heard any kind of announcement like this in a very long time. I can't even remember the last time there's been any kind of Xbox screensavers, dynamic backgrounds, or anything, or even ads. And that really speaks to the failure of the Xbox infrastructure, in that there isn't really a value add for being on console and having a unique interface and desktop and all that. Now, I also want to say, if this is an official screenshot that Xbox put out, something weird is going on here, because Kodi, to my understanding, cannot just be installed on the Xbox. I don't think you can install just random apps, or that the Microsoft Store or the Xbox Store has Kodi in it. Maybe it does, but Kodi is a media, movies, music, TV shows player, and it can connect to network servers inside your own house. I don't think it has a ton of plugins to connect to websites, and it's not so tightly integrated like Plex is, where Plex you basically have to have a subscription to use Plex. But yeah, Kodi would be my recommended service if you were going to put videos onto an Xbox in its internal storage, or if you were going to connect to a server and have a much bigger server with videos and music and things like that. But it certainly is the kind of device that you would use to play either legitimately or illegitimately collected video and music. And it does seem weird that you would have that right on the front page of your screenshot. It is also kind of weird that Windows Media Player or whatever would be built into the Xbox would not be your screenshotted application. So my assumption is that you can't install this directly, and that this screenshot is on a device that has been put into developer mode or hacked in some way. That's not even the focus of the screenshot. Let's see. The Nintendo NES version of Tetris is coming to the Switch Online this month. This is the first ever re-release of the game since its NES release. It's interesting because there's been tons of other Tetris games that have been released, although I guess this version has Mario, Luigi, and Pit from and Pit as a character is definitely not very recognizable these days. So I imagine Nintendo just hasn't bothered to ever agree to re-release the game, since any other previous re-release would not be on a Nintendo console. And I imagine other people who may own the rights to Tetris, if anybody owns the rights to Tetris really, at this point, wouldn't want to pay Nintendo for the license just to play the NES version. The thing there is almost certainly everybody who is a fan of Tetris probably at one time did play the NES version, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people think it is their favorite version or the best version out there. Let's see. The new PlayStation handheld report has been backed up by Digital Foundry. More sources have claimed that Sony is working on a new PlayStation Portable. Of course, you have to be careful here in that you have to make sure that they say they can corroborate the information, and that Digital Foundry isn't just reporting on what other people are reporting on. They're also saying it's still in early stages, so yeah. It may be a very long time before any kind of portable PlayStation of any sort comes out. Inherently, if I was running Sony, I'd say, you know what? Why don't we make a portable PlayStation 3 that just has a disk drive on the back? Make it some kind of limited run thing. And then that way we could have some backward compatibility for all our PlayStation 3 games, and then take the same hardware shell design of that PlayStation 3 at some point in the future and swap it out for a PlayStation 4, and then slowly swap it out for a PlayStation 5. That would give you probably close to 24 years if you just staggered it to every 8 years, maybe a little less than that. It would give you a ton of time, though, to work to the point where technology might actually get to the point where a PS5 could be a portable device, and that would make sense. Now, there might be some major problems in that if you put a disk drive into it, it's going to be very heavy and take up a lot of space. So the first thought on making a portable PlayStation 3 would be to say get rid of the disk drive. You probably would want some kind of FPGA built into it, and that might be a very expensive, very big FPGA if you're doing PS3 with the possibility of flashing it over to a PS4 or PS5 style chip. Yeah, and that would probably be way too expensive too. So man, that would be the way you would do it, though, is have it reprogram its processor with a FPGA to be a PS3 and then switch over to PS4. But yeah, if you got rid of the disk drives, then you could host like downloadable versions of PS3 games. But yeah, you would want to do it very cheaply, though, and very quickly. So the question is, could they get custom silicon to make a PS3 into a portable device quickly? I wonder if they really could. Although, if you take a step back from my kind of baseless speculation here, and my hypothetical of building a portable PS3 instead of trying to build a portable PS5, which is what it seems like they're working on, Sony doing anything is kind of questionable. There are new people in charge of Sony, but them spending money to make enough games to make PlayStation really stand out doesn't seem to be happening yet, although they might be doing that in the background. So maybe 4 to 5 years from now, there's a ton of PS5 games that have been secretly funded by Sony. But them coming out with new hardware is also very questionable. Moving on, I'm losing steam. I can feel it today already, and we're nowhere close to being done. Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled is coming to Game Pass this week. December's free quote-unquote games with Amazon Prime Gaming have been announced. Which, yeah. Did some research as far as grocery shopping through Amazon Prime, since I already have Amazon Prime. Although, I'm still not sure it's worth keeping Amazon Prime. And yeah, compared to my grocery, my delivery grocery service otherwise, my local grocery stores, the prices don't seem to be that different. Yeah. And with an Amazon Prime store card saving 5%, and subscribe and saves potentially saving even more, although that's not part of Amazon Fresh, and that's one of the problems with Amazon, is they have like several different companies they've acquired. Almost certainly if you're buying Whole Foods, the groceries would be way more expensive. And very possibly if I was seeking out sales and going to the grocery store directly, it would be cheaper. But that there is not as big of a difference as I thought there would be. So it might just save me on an app, frankly, to go from Kroger, which is what I'm using now, to Amazon. But yeah, nowadays getting a credit card, you can maybe get 3% back on the credit card for all your purchases on groceries, whereas 5% off on Amazon Prime beats it by a couple percentage points. There is inherently, though, a situation with food, in that if the food is not good, if you don't like the flavor of it, if the selection is not good, which I don't think Amazon Prime selection is perhaps as good as grocery stores, although I've noticed even my grocery store selection seems to be getting worse and worse, and that I think that is just generally what's happening overall. So yeah, there's a lot of things that could go wrong there. And yeah, the real way to save money would be to go to like 5 different grocery stores and know the prices and know what's on sale that day, that week at 5 different branches and styles of grocery stores. Of course, that's a lot of time to save you a very little amount of money. But yeah, I think I may give Amazon Fresh a chance once and see how well that works. One thing it does seem to be the difference though is that you can't schedule things out further out. So Kroger's app at the very least gives you the convenience where you have about a week. You could say I want on, you can go into the app on Monday and say I want something delivered on Saturday, whereas Amazon Fresh wants to get it out quicker in the next couple of days, which almost certainly means the people picking the orders are rushed always, which almost certainly means more mistakes. Moving on, back to video game news. Call of Duty is getting a Squid Game crossover in January. They did announce a season 2 of Squid Game, maybe already out. Oh yeah, that reminds me, I've been watching so much streaming and TV lately, I'm not even remembering. I'm watching this anime named Dark Gatherings on Hulu, which is a interesting kind of horror anime series, I would say. It's kind of weird in that the horror graphics are very horrific, but then the feel overall of the story is more kid-friendly, cartoony in its feel, although the show clearly is not kid-friendly. But I did watch the first few episodes of Silo on Apple TV, which, yeah, Silo came out before the Fallout TV series, and I very much recall liking the first season, but I would say perhaps in the first season it was a little bit slow episode to episode. I would say in the second season it feels even more slow in the first episodes, which is a real problem now that you can compare Silo directly to the Fallout TV series on Amazon Prime, which my complaint about the Fallout TV series was that it moved too fast and didn't really take its time. I could see the Fallout TV series having twice as many episodes and moving at half its speed and it being about exactly the right pace, whereas I would want to see Silo Season 2 in particular speed up and have more happen. And in general, it's not even a speed up thing, it more just needs to happen in general. And nothing really is happening. So now in the shadow of the Fallout TV series, Silo Season 2 feels worse than it would have felt in a vacuum, not compared to anything else. And I feel like perhaps Season 2 needed to start on a new mystery and a new question to investigate, instead of just kind of fully continuing the first season. And so yeah, I definitely feel like there's a decent chance the end of Season 2 of Silo will be not very satisfactory and will just continue to a Season 3, whereas Season 2 of Fallout will probably take you to a whole new area and show you a whole new collection of things. Silo Season 1 in particular still feels closer to what a realistic, not brightly colored, cartoony Fallout universe would be. Of course, that's not really what the Fallout universe should be, and the Fallout TV series, I think, did a pretty decent job of showing what the Fallout universe should be, but yeah. Silo Season 1 felt like a drama of if you were going to steal from the idea of Fallout, but make it more of a drama and make it more realistic, this is what you would get. Where the Fallout TV series is, if you were going to make a sped up, speedrun TV version of a Fallout game, this is what you'd get. Of course, I am back to appointment television with shows like Silo, where one new episode per week is going to come out, I imagine. Alright, moving on. PS5 adds limited time PS1 boot up and customization themes based on previous consoles. Which, okay. That's nice, but why time limit that? Like, this is a great example of how a Japanese company like Sony just wants to control everything, and they want you to have the boot up experience that they want you to have and not even allow you to permanently change it if you want to change it. Which, yeah, particularly in the case of the PS5, I imagine not even seeing the boot up screen that often, because I imagine the PS5 is mostly just asleep and you just don't see that reboot screen. In direct contrast to that, I couldn't even tell you what Xbox's boot up screen right now looks like, nor do I think Xbox or Microsoft cares what it looks like. And if Xbox did have an anniversary, I imagine they would just let you change the boot up screens. In a further contrast, it is also worth pointing out that the Steam Deck, one of its major value add functions is that you can put up any startup boot up movie you want into the game, and they encourage that. They have a whole storefront where you spend Steam points to buy different boot up screens. Now weirdly, none of the boot up screens have the option to turn off the audio when they're booting up, so when you're turning on your Steam Deck, you are going to wake up anybody in the room who may be sleeping next to you. You can modify the videos and take the audio out, but to do that I had to do it manually with handbrake, which that's certainly a hassle, and there's no easy way to do that. I would also say none of the boot up screens are particularly that interesting, but that's just my own personal opinion. But it is interesting certainly that the Steam Deck has that as an issue, and that from day one you could change the boot up screens, and yet PlayStation is not even letting you permanently change the boot up screen for its 30th anniversary. There's something else about the Steam Deck. Oh, I saw an article where somebody tried to run only IP version 6 in their internal local area network and try it for a month and see what happens. And the Nintendo Switch and the Steam Deck in particular can't do that. They assume if there is no IP version 4 connectivity, that there is just no connectivity in the first place. So yeah, it is kind of interesting that the Steam Deck has a new device, while it can connect via IP version 6, still is requiring an IP version 4 address. And that could be fixed very easily. The Nintendo Switch could also be updated to fix that issue. It is pretty much backwards, though, to have IP version 6 only enabled in your home router in your local area network. The only reason you might do that is if you're running a massive school or some other facility and you just for some reason didn't want to configure IP version 4, or you had so many devices connected you couldn't do IP version 4, which that is kind of crazy. That would be a lot. It'd be like 254 to the power of 254 to the power of 254 to the power of 254. Yeah. And that just doesn't make any sense. It makes way more sense, and this is pretty much how everybody in ISPs and everything have just done it, for the ISPs to either own IP version for addresses for real, or just in the back end where you don't even see it, convert IP version for addresses to IP version 6 when connecting to the internet. Which, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Just let the ISPs handle version 6. There's no real improvement other than an increase in the amount of addresses between version 4 and version 6. And it's just more complicated to work with. There probably is some kind of standard improvement somewhat, but not really much, because the rest of the protocols are all improved in other ways. There was this whole new quick standard that was going to potentially replace TCP, the TCP transmission control protocol, to save on bandwidth, but it'll probably be decades before the quick standard became a real standard and got implemented into routers so that it actually could work. Or actually, you don't have to integrate it into routers, because it actually just hides everything from the router and does it from end browser to internet server. And so getting the servers to support the quick protocol would be the real upgrade, and the browsers probably already support it. Chrome probably already supports it. Oh, I am rambling all over the place today. Good Old Games plans to preserve World of Warcraft 1 and 2, even though Blizzard is delisting them, which is to say that they're going to continue to hack the games and patch the games to make them playable for people who already bought the games, and let people who already bought the games download them again. They've also put the Warcraft 1 and 2 original versions on sale. Now, if you really wanted the original versions, are you really getting the original versions from Good Old Games after they potentially mod it and hack it so that it runs on Windows 11? That is certainly a preservation issue, and it is questionable how Good Old Games has the legal right to do that. Maybe their contracts just have it written that way, or maybe they're just assuming Microsoft isn't going to sue them. Clearly, it's Activision Blizzard / Microsoft's desire that Warcraft 1 and 2 go away so that Blizzard can sell Warcraft 1 Remastered or Reforged, and Warcraft 2 Remastered or Reforged, whatever it's called. It still puts you in this weird rock and a hard place where I probably would just want to play the remastered version on Steam than have to rush to buy the game right now on Good Old Games. And at a certain point, if the game is just being delisted, I think once a game is being delisted everywhere, then you should consider those original versions just abandonware. And honestly, there's an argument to be made that as soon as nobody who actually worked on Warcraft 1 and 2 actually is receiving any benefit from new sales, the game should be considered public domain. Almost certainly, anybody who did work on Warcraft 1 and 2 and happens to still work at Activision Blizzard is not getting any royalties or any benefit at all from those sales. Almost certainly all that money is going directly into the pockets of people who had no creative input or input at all into the development of those games. Then we had already talked about this, that a pitch video for an unreleased LEGO James Bond game has leaked, but then the video has been blocked and taken down everywhere. So, yeah, doesn't really seem like there can be any more news around that. Again, I said last stream, it's very questionable how you would make a Lego James Bond game and not deal with the many problems of the James Bond movies that just don't make it kid friendly enough. You would struggle certainly there, just in the names of all the female characters in particular, and that I don't know how you would be able to have any of the female characters from a James Bond game in the Lego game, since every single female character for the most part has a innuendo built around them, and almost every female character in the James Bond movies are supposed to be femme fatales, and frankly they just don't look like that in minifig versions. Even James Bond is supposed to be a big bowl of man meat, and he just isn't going to look like that in Lego form. That's not even to talk about the violence in James Bond movies. There's a big difference certainly between like sitting your kid down and watching an Indiana Jones movie that might be fairly violent versus a James Bond movie that's going to be even more violent and have innuendos in it. I wouldn't really recommend any of those kinds of movies for kids. They're also very slow movies, so I imagine kids won't want to sit through a James Bond or even an Indiana Jones movie until they're fairly old. Alright, well, that finally gets us to the Gamatsu articles. Don Don Pachi True Death is coming to the Switch on December 19th in Japan. It's a bullet hell shoot 'em up game, apparently. Crystar for the PS5 is now available in the West. I guess we do speed up somewhat when we go to the Gamatsu articles because the headlines are more simplistic and it's less of a news article as much as a lot of times it's just a press release. Bleach Rebirth of Souls launches March 21st, 2025. Which, yeah. I assume this is a fighting game. But I also wonder how you even do a fighting game around Bleach. Yeah. Yeah, that definitely would be the question, is how do you even do a fighting game around Bleach, since every single fight in Bleach is built around just doing a little bit of sword swinging before you unleash some new magical power that is bespoke and unique to that one fight. Yeah. Yeah. Even in the Dragon Ball fighting games, I imagine you run into that problem where you're just having Goku doing Kamehamehas over and over again, and they're either very weak or they're way overpowered and they end fights too quickly. Gran Turismo 7 free trial, my first Gran Turismo, launches December 6th. The 100 line Last Defense Academy launches April 24th, 2025 in the West. Is this some kind of visual novel? This looks to me much closer to something like Danganronpa in animation style. So I'd have to assume that this is the same animator, but the actual game seems to be more of a weird RPG experience. It says it's a strategy RPG, JRPG. So animation style and weirdness of Danganronpa. With maybe Persona style fighting. Does seem like there might be some massive battling game mechanic too. But I would definitely assume that there's just a lot more conversation going on too. 100-line Last Defense Academy Extreme Despair trailer. So I wonder if this is literally in the Danganronpa universe. Project Extreme X Despair was the original title. Yeah, I definitely would assume that at the very beginning, at least, this was going to be a in the Danganronpa universe. And yeah, it's interesting that was labeled as likely M17 plus as the rating. I'm not expecting the trailer to be as bloody as this, though. And I can't help but wonder to assume that almost nobody is going to make it out alive at the end of this story. This is kind of a great example of just showing how Japanese anime is so different from the reality of Japanese schools, and that you have all these wild and crazy high fashion anime characters with wild and crazy different hair colors showing up, when in reality a Japanese school would probably be everybody in the exact same uniforms, girls in skirts, boys in slacks, everybody with short black haircut, black hair colors, short haircuts for the boys, possibly slightly longer hair styles for the girls, and maybe a ponytail. So yeah, there is a real lament in the animators in that they just did not appreciate the uniformity of the Japanese school society. I don't think it really benefits Japanese society at all to have that level of uniformity. Anyways, it may benefit the schools and just controlling the students, but in the long run, I don't think it benefits the individuals and the students themselves. Moving on, a comedy point-and-click adventure game, A Week in the Life of an Asocial Giraffe, has a debut trailer. Has an interesting title, to say the least. And that a giraffe would always stand out. Wild Keepers Rising is launching in the spring of 2025. Open alpha test is now available. The Famitsu review scores for issue 1877 are available, giving Fairy Tail 2 33 out of 40. Game takes about 30 hours to clear and 50 hours with side activities. Let's see, this Japanese game here getting 29 out of 40. And then this Japanese game getting 29 out of 40. And then Tetris Forever getting a fairly high 34 out of 40. So, yeah. While Fairy Tail did well too, and was the screenshot Gamatsu used, Tetris Forever beating them by a point. The EVO Japan 2025 lineup has been announced, so we can see the state of pretty much fighting in general, or fighting games in Japan, which I don't think are particularly doing greatly. So it's Grand Blue Fantasy Rising versus Rising. King of Fighters 15. Tekken 8. Do I really need to zoom in here? Guilty Gear Strive. And Street Fighter. I think this is 5. Whatever the newest Street Fighter is. And so those are the 5 one-on-one games. Notice not a single one of those are Smash Brothers clone like games, which we've definitely seen a lot of those try to become popular lately, but probably for a very different target audience. Also notice there is no Mortal Kombat here, which that has failed to gain relevance, and I imagine there are several other games that fighting game series that are missing here, like Dead or Alive is one that stands out as, yeah. And then for 5-on-5 they're going to do Third Strike Street Fighter 3, which I don't know if that's particularly new, and Virtua Fighter 5 Revo. So yeah, no Dragon Ball Fighter Z showing up here. No game that is based on any kind of real license showing up here. These are the pro fighting games that the pros want to play, I would assume. And yeah, there's just a big difference between casual fighting games for casuals and pro fighting games for pros. And there's probably way too many fighting games overall, considering I don't imagine either audience is particularly that large. Nintendo Switch Online adding Donkey Kong Land 3. X-Defiant is going to end its service on June 3rd, 2025. SD Gundam G Generation Eternal network test is set for January 23rd to the 28th. Yatori no Shita, The Outcast, the game, The Hidden Ones, launches in 2025 for PC, iOS, and Android. So the actual game is called The Hidden Ones, but it's part of a series called Hitori no Shita, The Outcast. Yeah, apparently Hitori no Shita 3D is an action fighting game. Never heard of this though. So maybe this is a manga that's running in popularity right now, or just running right now, that hasn't come to the West. Because yeah, I don't recognize any of these characters or any of this at all. Interesting. Let's see. Umurangi Generation Deluxe Kit Physical Edition has been announced for the PS5 and Switch. This is yet another game I don't recognize. And they're announcing the physical deluxe kit. And the hand-drawn adventure game Universe for Sale is coming to all consoles, iOS, and Android on December 19th. It's currently available for PC. Yeah. Let's go ahead and check that out on Steam. It's already on the follow list. So I did make a YouTube short on it, and we can see it's overall positive, so can put it on the wish list. There is a small bit of hope, and perhaps it is a tiny diluted bit of hope, though, that by this time next year I will be buying and playing a lot more games if things go well. Of course, if things don't go well, the exact opposite will be true. But yeah, I could see starting to focus more on making content and putting out more content and hoping that that actually helps in any way, which it probably won't. Suppose news-wise, it is also worth pointing out that IBM came out with their Battle Mage graphics card. I don't really have any reviews or anything I've seen on it yet, so who knows how good it actually will be. This was just a day after they fired, or forced out, it seems like was the actual case, the IBM CEO. But I definitely question whether we'll be seeing any IBM GPUs being used in any kind of console or for anybody building a PC gaming thing. Like, if there are going to be shortages of graphics cards, they will probably be across the board, both from AMD and NVIDIA and IBM. And I think it is IBM that I'm talking about, not Intel. It might be Intel. It might be confusing the two companies. And they may be the same company at this point. But yeah. They didn't come out with a new CPU, which would have been more interesting to talk about, I guess, though. Because, you know, a new Pentium with some new features might be interesting. Apparently FromSoft is working on multiple projects across various genres, which is to say basically nothing. Let's see, Valve has some new branding guidelines. This is from Gaming on Linux now. We're going to their news. For Steam Deck, SteamOS for more devices. Let's see if there's anything important here. Let's see. We're going to see potentially things powered by SteamOS with logo and brand guidelines. They are getting into real details as far as the exact colors to use and how to print it in what colors. And interestingly, they are picking just black, and pure white. They're not even going slight off, and definitely not doing anything blue. Let's see. The logo indicates hardware device will run SteamOS and boot into SteamOS upon powering on the device. Interesting, so you can't have a dual boot thing that prefers something else. Manufacturers will ship hardware with a Steam image in the form provided by and or developed in close collaboration with Valve, which arguably is making the argument that if you're not in close collaboration with Valve, you can't use this. Physical alteration should not be made to the logo, and it should not be combined with any other branding elements, which would imply that you would see this boot up. As you turn on the thing, it would say powered by SteamOS as a full screen, or if you saw this in print, you would see it by itself. But I imagine there might be some leniency there, because if I had powered by SteamOS in the lower left hand corner, and then I had Asus over here in the lower right hand corner, I think that would be acceptable. So, brands and featured designations. Let's see. There are several other things here worth using. Hardware shipping with Valve approved controller inputs makes it Steam compatible. Steam included. It's shipping with Steam client. This is for brick and mortar establishments. And some VR stuff. So they still are focused on VR. And what's funny is this isn't a logo that they're recommending. This is a download link that they put in the grid, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, we're gonna start seeing stuff like this. They're likely, we already have 2 Steam controllers now that I think we're going to start seeing more of Steam controllers in general. And I wouldn't be surprised if Valve never really gets into the business of trying to make their own specific controller and undercut third-party manufacturers of Steam controllers, because that's probably not a big money maker or a big part of their focus. The only real reason they're even making the Steam Deck is to have a hardware, a PC effectively being built that would be more standard. If somebody started in collaboration with Valve making a Steam Deck 2, I think Valve would be more than happy to hand over the reins of that development to a different company and not make a Steam Deck themselves. They also don't want to go down the direction of Steam machines and have a whole bunch of different companies making a whole bunch of different things called Steam machines, with there being no standardization there. I could see there even being a whole bunch of hardware manufacturers getting together and making a consortium of sort, where there is a very specific CPU and chipset and just hardware layout that everybody agrees to, where one manufacturer's of a Steam Deck looks almost exactly the same as the next manufacturer's version of a Steam Deck. Let's see, this article says, I will admit I had an orgasm at the portable Pilot mini console from Soul Circuit. Interesting, this is a mini PC using a Raspberry Pi 5, which I suspect is just a full-size Raspberry Pi 5. They do have compute modules for 5 coming out just about now, and so this must be a much larger device than what it seems like. And I would have to question if this is perhaps the back side of this, or nope, because this is gray. So this has to be a completely different design than this one. Yeah. And clearly this has like a Game Boy layout, but probably doesn't even run particularly well. It is the first device I've ever seen that looks like it has a scroll wheel for the thumb, and looks like there might be a thumb ball there for analog inputs. This is the kind of device over here that's more realistic to what you'd actually design and sell. This is very much a silly design. Apparently the silliness of this design continues into a controller layout, which again you have a scroll circle now, scroll dial. Well, for my own interest I'd like to watch this, but I will jump around. Yeah. Debian Linux, not particularly succeeding that well as a portable device. Raspberry Pi 5, not going to be really powerful enough to do Blender. On-screen touch keyboard. Here's kind of a great example. They've put in some kind of interface here that makes it kind of like Android. But yeah, it's kind of a great example of how gaming isn't really going to be a thing just by touching touchscreens. Yeah, this device is definitely showing off that it can launch pretty powerful Linux programs like FreeCAD here, but it's not likely going to be a daily driver type device that you could actually work with using any of those programs. Raspberry Pi 5 is just not that fast. So yeah, the whole touchscreen version of this is fairly questionable. And yeah, this version is also fairly questionable. But yeah, these are great examples of the kinds of project gadgets that have been very popular around the Raspberry Pi, and at the very least they are still trying to do something with the Raspberry Pi to make it work better. But yeah, I don't think I would choose either one of these if I was trying to run RetroPie on them and just run a bunch of ROMs and trying to play Game Boy games or something like that. I wouldn't want a whole keyboard at the bottom of my controller. We probably are not too far from just full-on hardware voice input instead of keyboards anyways, where even the Raspberry Pi, not connected to the internet, you could talk to it and have it type out things. Let's see, the open source PlayStation Remote Play app gets improvements for the Steam Deck. This is Chiaking NG. Which I'd assume this lets you play games that are on your PlayStation for PlayStation 5 in the same network, streaming them to your Steam Deck. Which, yeah, I could see a real advantage to that. If you have a ton of money, you have a PlayStation 5 in the main room, and you have 2 or 3 kids that are playing Steam, that have Steam Decks, then you don't end up having to buy 2 or 3 PlayStation 5s and Steam Decks. It's still very much a tough financial argument to make, though. You would definitely start with kids just having Steam Decks and trying to get them to just play everything on PC, and then if there's another Christmas that comes around, getting a PlayStation 5 and those few exclusive PlayStation 5 games they might want to play. And even in that case, they still probably would want to play the PlayStation 5 directly connected to a TV. Steam Desktop and Steam Deck update fixes a lot of bugs for game recording, remote play, and the ROG Ally X. They are definitely focusing heavily on the ROG Ally and Ally X right now as far as compatibility, which CES is coming in the first quarter of 2025, and I would assume you're going to have several new devices that people get hyped about and want to see SteamOS running on at that point. And so Valve is running out of time to even focus specifically on the ROG Ally X before they're going to have to move on to the next new hotness to try and support that. But, you know, eventually that'll get easier, and Valve hopefully will get better at just supporting almost all new hardware on launch. And secretly, anybody developing a new ROG Ally-like device probably already is building it in mind to run SteamOS, because hardware developers don't want to actually make their own operating systems or work with Windows that much. So Intel, not IBM, announced their Arc B series GPUs and the XeS S2, which is, I assume, like DLSS super sampling, the day after the CEO Pat Gelsinger retired, or was forced to retire from what I hear. Again, I don't have any metrics here, but I wouldn't really expect these graphics cards to be amazing or used by anybody. Even if they are amazing, frankly, they may be way more expensive than they are worth. Minecraft Java 1.21.4, the Garden Awakens update, is now bringing in some new toys and a new biome. Interesting. there's this whole drama going right now around one of the major Minecraft groups that was very popular, and I used to watch them a lot more in the Mindcrack community, Mindcrack group, I believe is the name of them. In that one of their founding members was apparently caught being sexually aggressive, too flirty, however you want to describe it, from the rumors I hear, and they kicked him out of the group, and are now effectively erasing him from history. But yeah, I don't know how much drama that's really creating, because I don't know how many people are even caring about Minecraft, let alone Minecrack. A 4X RPG, Heart of the Machines from Arcean Works AI War, releases January 2025. DXVK Seric for older GPUs, version 1.10.4 has been released. Halo 2 co-op mod Synergy has been upgraded for the Half-Life 2 20th anniversary update. Which I guess they're still celebrating that anniversary. Apparently the best Linux distributions for 2025 according to Gaming on Linux, which they apparently have made a list here. So let's see. This is a longer article, I don't want to read it all. The latest long-term support versions of Kubuntu, Kubuntu 24.04.1. Let's see. So I guess he's suggesting Kubuntu. Because he's not really talking about any other Linuxes. Which isn't the worst suggestion ever. I'd say maybe Bakelite Linux is a little bit more risky and less of a set or forget it setup, I imagine. But I probably would lean towards suggesting Bakelite over Kubuntu. But you do have that stability, certainly, in that Kubuntu is just Ubuntu with KDE Plasma Desktop on top of it. And Ubuntu has been around for long, and long-term support version is going to just be, or at least hopefully it would be, very rock solid. Just no problems, no major updates needed to be installed on it. Now, what you're not getting in Ubuntu is Flatpaks or Flatpak support. So you're not getting any out-of-the-box default sandboxing for any extra security you think that might be providing you. Although, I guess there is sandboxing in the form of snaps if you're installing snaps. Well, I guess you can do Flatpaks on Kubuntu. I didn't realize you could do that. Interesting. That being said, it is not going to look like your Steam Deck. Not 100%. It may look a lot like it, but yeah. You'll get a much more consistent operating system. And I would say in 2025 in particular, the era in which you have an iPhone with a different looking operating system than your Windows computer versus your Android phone looking completely different, that era should mostly go away. And so if you're going to do gaming on Linux in particular, having something that looks exactly the same as your Steam Deck is something that is very much desirable and should be the case, and acts like your Steam Deck. It is also worth pointing out that SteamOS is probably at an older version of KDE Plasma than what Kubuntu would have. I very well may screw up my Bazzite Linux install when I build my new computer and find that it's just not stable enough and have to move to something like Kubuntu. That definitely would be my backup suggestion, but I would rather prefer stick with Bazzite Linux if at all possible until SteamOS comes out, and then I'll install SteamOS, and if SteamOS comes out I would stick with that because I trust Valve to have the funds and the development skill to support SteamOS even more than Bazzite Linux is going to get support. Let's see, the Prime Gaming December 3rd edition is listed here. As far as what games you get with Prime Gaming. Let's see, KDE's 2024 fundraiser has hit its goal. So they've made more than 75,000 euro in the last 30 days, which will help the development of KDE. I definitely get the feeling that KDE probably is a little understaffed and underfunded for what it has become as the default desktop in SteamOS. I'm not sure if they really would have agreed to that or wanted that, and had they known that all of a sudden they were going to get the spotlight put on them. And there definitely feels like more money is going to be good and may have them hire more people to continue to work on KDE, but also they probably could use some more people in the organization as far as developers just implementing new functions and features and thinking more about the direction they're going. And there is definitely a question about what direction should KDE go if all of a sudden almost everybody that's using KDE is doing it through a Steam Deck. Should they become focused on the Steam Deck and hyper vigilant on that, or should they try to be more broad in what they develop and what they improve in their desktop environment? Because there definitely are a lot of things you could do on a larger screen as far as a desktop environment that just makes no sense on the small screen of a Steam Deck. Yeah. Steam Deck hit 17,000 games playable and verified. That's kind of old news. And then that's old news. And that'll bring us to GameDeveloper.com, and I bet all of this is going to be old news too. Yeah. Still haven't fixed that. So these are things we can just skip. And then hopefully we will be able to go through all the new games that came out on Steam in the past couple days. Now that things are starting to warm up a little bit more, I imagine we will start to see more games getting released. Although the Steam sale may very well be slowing down the release of new games on Steam too. Yeah. And I'm not really anticipating too much as far as new games anyways. It definitely feels to me like the November month just came and went in a blink of an eye. And so now it feels like it would be kind of crazy to come out with new games. Interesting here. Here you have a sun raising simulator, which is interesting because I've never seen any other game where you've raised a son. There is one of the Princess Maker games. I think you can raise a son, but yeah, almost every game is always a daughter raising simulator. And this one seems to be highly focused on trauma and emotions of childhood. So this may not be so much a real simplistic simulator game as much as it might have some deeper message it's trying to impose, which very well may be imposed very poorly. Here's a great example of a game where just because of the visuals I'm not willing to really give it a chance. There might be an amazing story there, but it's just too ugly. Yeah, these horror games, kind of in the opposite way, where you have to stand out visually so well for me to give them a chance. I'm seeing a lot more of these kind of colorful, would you call them desktop games? Maybe. Hidden object games, city resource manager games. We have Cut the Rope Clone. Here you have a Korean only game, which you don't see that too often. You do expect to see it more though. That we will see, just like Korean only games. And other Asian country language only games. Yeah, I'll give this a chance. One of the slick deals I did see was the movie Run Lola Run in 4K UHD was on sale for like $15, which is still probably too expensive. I question if there's actually any improvements on some of these movies when they're getting re-released as 4K UHD masters. I also heavily question there. I own like the DVD of Run Lola Run and I've watched it like exactly once. So just don't think for the amount of time it sat on the shelf I got real value out of it. There's a difference between, say, my collection of anime DVDs where it would be extremely expensive, if not impossible, to replace those, and more standard movies like Blade Runner has a slight sale. For the final cut of Blade Runner in 4K UHD, but that's almost certainly going to always be available for purchase. Some of these games I'd already put on the fall list. Blade Runner in particular might be worth getting a 4K UHD because it might help with the darkness if there's an HDR remaster of it, because that is incredibly dark, visually dark, just no brightness in the image movie. Yeah, there's a difference. I've enjoyed having the anime DVDs on my shelf and looking over and seeing they're there, even though I'm not actually playing them. It gives me a feeling as a decoration where I couldn't even tell you on what other bookshelf in a different room I have Run Lola Run sitting on. And certainly, if you already own the DVD, putting it into an upscaling Blu-ray player, 4K UHD Blu-ray player that just upscales things might be good enough. Certainly, you may not really need a remaster. And I do think Run Lola Run is probably a good candidate for a movie to be remastered as far as the visuals go, but I don't think it's an absolute necessity that it would be remastered. And then definitely a lot of older movies just would not really make any sense to be remastered if there's just no action or visualness to it. I think Sleepless in Seattle might be a great example of something where even if you could get the graphics to be remastered and it look great, you probably don't need that level of upgrade. It's not like video games, where video games are inherently rendered to begin with. Here's the Snow Brothers game. It's been out since December 2nd and it has only one user review. I never really thought Snow Brothers was particularly that big of a game. Maybe a little bit bigger in Japan. So I could definitely see why not that many people would be willing to pay that price. $26.99 is a really high price for Snow Brothers re-release. And that is a great example of a game that was re-released with nothing really being changed, where you could have remastered those graphics. Looks like we're seeing a few Christmas games, Christmas themed games, that I can't actually say something about, or at least have some hopes. I guess I'm still very much 100% against tower defense games, though. VR boxing game, probably not anything. I'm being fairly generous today. I'm gonna say no to that. I still do have a long list of like new things I'd like to get. But I do also have to admit that, like, if I was gonna buy a new 4K version of like Babylon 5, longer running series, which is what would catch my attention, or even Seinfeld, which, yeah, if I was gonna do that, I have to admit to myself that I am wasting a lot of money and replacing something I already have. I could justify it a little bit by giving away the videos to other people, but you just don't return to things, and things that you are going to return to nowadays you can almost certainly get on a streaming service anyways. And I am definitely more interested in watching new movies, even if they're terrible movies. I watched one on Hulu called Wolf Rising, which definitely was kind of a pointless movie. But yeah, I'd rather watch something new, and I only really go back to a few things every now and then, very small number of things. And so ownership of movies these days, for me in particular, and I know this is just me rambling and has nothing to do with video games, yeah, ownership of movies these days to me is very much more of a preservation thing. Is own the things that might disappear for one reason or another. Own the lesser known things. Don't bother with things that will always be on a streaming service. I imagine Run Lola Run, it really is one of those movies that you could see on a streaming service. Although there is certainly a snobbishness one can justifiably have around not streaming movies, because the graphics on streaming and the bit rate on streaming is not going to be anywhere as good as on disc. And with me completing that ramble, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.